All right. In the last lecture, what I tried to do was sort of introduce the first social package that made us sort of modern humans. The social package that basically lasted from 150, 200,000 BC through today. First societies still exist in many parts of the world, and for 200,000 years you could say they have proven that they can and deserve to exist. We as modern and agriculturalists, our history is only 5,000 years. We have not yet proved that we will last 2,000 years, 200,000 years yet. So we have an intersection really with our modern agricultural worldview and the worldview really of the first societies. Then we're still playing that out in many parts of the world. Today we're going to move, largely, the Dakung, South Africa, the Aborigines in Australia, these are in some sense the leftovers of the most ancient of our first society world. But there are other first societies, and we're going to sort of move northward as the sort of ice sheets sort of expanded and contracted. Humans, of course, went northward. And originally, this would have been largely sort of open grassland, tundra, very little sort of forest as we might imagine it today. So humans followed the animals. And one strand went 40,000 BC, wound up in Australia. And more or less at the same time, humans were entering what's called Europe. Europe, around 40,000 would have had sparse forests and grassland, but around 28,000 BC, the ice sheets expanded into what was called the last sort of ice age, last great ice age. And Europe would have looked like this, very few trees, in fact. So if you were to be flying over France, you would have seen just mainly grassland, right? Open tundra. You would have seen wild horses, wild reindeer, of course, mammoth roaming around. So imagine you're like you see these shots sometimes when you fly over Africa and you see below you all these herds of animals, scattering, below the airplane. Well, that's what Europe would have been like as well. So when it got cold, and we're talking about, not this cold, but even worse, right? Sort of frighteningly cold. The glaciers were 1 kilometer thick. I mean, that's a lot of ice. And between the glaciers, in front of the glaciers, were sort of frozen earth, and then sort of a tundra, and then sort of a glacial desert. So why didn't people leave? Why didn't they say, I'm out of here, I'm going to go south, right, where it's at least a bit warmer? Well, the reason they didn't leave is because you had a hunter's paradise. Europe, if you were a hunter, this is where you wanted to go. The wild horses that became extinct were hunted to extinction in Europe, and of course survived only then later in Central Asia. Reindeer, by the millions, and of course the all-important and most impressive, the mammoth. The humans that basically cohered to become the first great hunting society of the world are called the Gravettians. That's not what they call themselves, of course. We have no clue what they call themselves. That's named after an archaeological site where they lived. So it sort of stuck, and that's sort of the name that is given to them by the archaeologists. So the Gravettians really created the first sort of cold weather hunting society. So you have to imagine an ecological world where everything sort of that's in England and Norway and Denmark would have been all under the vast sheet of ice. Below that would have been the sort of permafrost and tundra, and below that grasslands and scrub trees and forests. And in the red zone, we sort of see where the mammoth would be migrating. So the mammoths don't like the cold any more than you do, even though they're obviously protected by it, by their wool. But when it gets cold in winter, they will sort of come to the south. And then in the summer, they'll sort of move up to the north. By the thousands, right, long lumbering herds. And so you can see in the red dots, which are the archaeological sites of the Gravettians, they were, on the track, right, where the mammoths were, quite obviously.